Okay, we'll start off now. Good evening, everyone. I am Vipin Srikumar, PhD student in the Strategic Management Department at IIM Calcutta. We at Radio Sophia are happy to have all of you join in today. So, as you guys know, Radio Sophia is a virtual platform where we host various academic and non-academic discussions on a wide range of topics. You can follow us on social media for more updates. Today, we'll be talking about climate change and management. And to talk on the topic, we are lucky to have with us today Dr. Santanu Bhadra, Research Associate at ISB Hyderabad. Shantanu recently completed his PhD in Strategic Management from IIM Calcutta on the topic of climate change and adoption of renewable energy by Indian firms. Shantanu has over 8 years of experience in the IT services industry, working predominantly on the financial services domain. He completed his Bachelor of Engineering from Jadavpur University in 2004. His research on climate change won the MB Sarkar Memorial Doctoral Proposal Award at the Strategic Management International Conference in 2018. Above all, Shantanu is a close friend and a mentor, and we are definitely lucky to have him today to talk on this very relevant and important topic. I am looking forward to seeing his work published in top-tier journals soon. So without taking more time, I'll hand over to Shantanu. Over to you, Shantanu.
Yeah, thank you, Vipin. Just make sure that everybody is in, right? The participants.
Yeah,
let everybody in. Okay,
yeah, we'll be anyways uploading this on YouTube. So
yeah, sure. So thank you, Vipin, and thank you, Kranti, also for arranging this kind of sessions. It's very refreshing. So yeah, today's topic is about climate change and how management is responding to it. It's globally as well as the Indian scenario. So what I thought of discussing today is very simplistic overview, like what are the different scenarios and what are the broad level of management response that I actually experienced when I did my research. So when you think about climate change, these two graphs actually concisely demonstrates what is happening here. So the top graph, if you see that it talks about the annual carbon dioxide emissions across the globe. And if you look closely that after 1850, there is a upsurge, right? And after 1950, post World War II, it accelerated actually exponentially. So what is happening here, as a scientist say that post-industrialization, the late 19th century, early 19th century, and the post that World War II happened, again that industrialization at US boomed. The human intervention in industrial activities raised that carbon dioxide emission level, right? And we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, meaning that it traps the heat of the atmosphere. And because of that, what is happening that global warming is at an increasing rate is happening. So what is the impact? I mean, because of this heat trapping, greenhouse gases, and temperature increasing, the impact is in that bottom graph. As you can see, one of the biggest impact is that sea level rise. So why is it dangerous? Because you can see that the pace of global sea level rise more than doubled from 1.4 millimeter per year throughout most of the 20th century to 3.6 millimeter per year from 2006 to 2015. So last one decade, it just almost took a big turn that it is increasing in a so rapid pace. And in the graph, you can see there are different scenarios given, right? Extreme to high to low level. And the prediction is that if this continues, even at a very intermediate level, towards the end of this century, the big cities of the world, which are mostly coastal cities like New York or Mumbai, or even a country like Bangladesh, might be underwater. This feels scary, right? So all the industrial activities, most of the financial hubs are in these coastal cities, the big cities, right? Which are very close to the sea level. So this is that overall grand challenge that we have to limit this global warming and because of that this climate change. Given this challenge, there are two major ways to solve this issue, right? One is adaptation, meaning that we adapt to the life in a changing climate, involves adjusting to the actual or expected future climate. So suppose because of climate change what already happened, there is too much flood or there is drought, or too much, hurricane and rain and etc. So the local community, the local people are trying to adapt to that change, right? Maybe the farmers, maybe they will migrate, or the farmers will probably change their, cultivation style and etc. So that's the adaptation part, that whatever is changing or whatever has changed, we just adapt to it. And the second is, more importantly, mitigation, that we really stop generating greenhouse gases, the human induced carbon dioxide emissions, so that this doesn't aggravate much. So that, the previous slide we saw that there are different scenarios, that worst scenario doesn't happen, because if we keep on continuing generating the greenhouse gases the way we're doing today, that disastrous situation that will happen, I mean, the kind of changes that might happen to the geophysical structure, we might not be able to have the resources or the capacity to even adapt. I mean, there will be big loss of life and property in the earth, on the earth, right? So we cannot afford to just keep on adapting. We have to do very aggressively mitigation, processes and strategies to combat climate change. So one is geophysical change, that too much rain, too much chilled winter and hotter summers. So there it's just started to experience in our current world, because the prediction is that the major effect of climate change has not yet to come. It's yet to come. So it's just the tip of the iceberg, that what is changing in the overall climate. So that's the geophysical part. But more importantly, that institutional change, that is taking a big leap, because the mitigation focus, the United Nations and other institutional bodies across the globe, they are actually trying to prohibit and take measures so that the human activities doesn't produce CO2. Even that call is that we need to decarbonize. Not even a single ton of CO2 should be emitted in the atmosphere. So the call is to decarbonize our the system or the economic activities, so that we can have a we can actually mitigate this disastrous consequences of climate change. So the institutional part is more important at this point, because that focuses more on mitigation. And as you can see, that one of the sustainable development goals by the United Nations is talking about that take urgent action to combat climate change. And if you think closely, that the industries or the farms are not responding to geophysical matters so much, because it hasn't happened in a large scale as yet. Whereas the institutional changes are happening very rapidly and in a fast pace. So the current responses are most institutional responses, right? The farms are trying to negotiate with the regulations, the laws and the policies, and trying to behave so that they can align with those policies, right? So this is very important point, that more than the geophysical, the responses are more institutional at this point. Now, let me give one example, like in this institutional changes or the institutional dynamics, just one example, like what are the different negotiations or discourses are going on, and what is the uncertainties associated with it, right? So in this picture, you can see that there are three major discourses about reducing carbon emission. So one is the regulation, that the regulatory authorities, the governments and the local authorities will basically set a standard that you cannot use this technology or fossil fuel, or you have to really go to renewable energy with this kind of limits and etc. So a very hard regulation on the farms. So the pushback from that market economics and other who believes in free market forces believe that regulation is not so much efficient as how the market forces can take care of it. So when you do regulation, what happens is that there needs to be a lot of cost around bureaucracy, and sometimes if you don't update the regulations and fall back on that the old rules and policies and laws, and how governments work, so it's very slow paced. So what happens is that innovation might stop. Whereas the other two channels, which is cap and trade and carbon taxing, these are market based. So the proponents say that the market based solutions basically brings efficiency in the forefront, and the efficient farms which will actually use less carbon and innovate more on this front will survive, and the inefficient farms will just die down, and that way globally the whole system will move towards low carbon emission system, right? So these two market-based systems, let me just give some idea about that. Even they are not perfect, right? So let's talk about cap and trade. What cap and trade talks about is that the authorities will basically set a cap. Like that means that every year there will be a top limit of how much carbon can be produced in the, say, in a country. Okay, and depending upon that, suppose there's 100 ton, just given a hypothetical example, say 100 ton of carbon will be used by the whole country, like all the farms or different activities, and that will be divided into different permits. So there's 100 permits, so one permit will give you say 1 ton of carbon usage, right? And then it will be distributed in the market, and there will be trade. That means that whoever wants to pay for the permit can buy the permit, and then using that permit, the farm can produce that much carbon. But even if it exceeds that, then you have to pay a hefty fine, and maybe there can be different other regulatory actions. And whoever is not able to want to pay for the permit, they can innovate and they can reduce their carbon emission. That way they can really survive. So that way it will be more efficient, that the innovation will happen. But the drawback is that one the critics say that who decides the cap, whether that cap will actually benefit that overall requirement of that climate change, right? So there might be more politics or no more what do I say, that negotiations, that what the cap is. So as common people, we will not never know, right? We will not decide, or we will not know the science behind it, and suddenly that government decides in some cap. So whether that's the right cap or not, whether we need a more progressively downward caps, that is not very sure. We are not very sure about that. And also when you become trading those permits, there will be always secondary market, right? And there's always a possibility of some speculation and bubble creation in the secondary market of that permits, right? So as it happens in the current stock market. So once there is a speculation and bubble creation, it might, the secondary market might collapse, and then the whole system might be dwindling situation, that what is the right price of the permit will never come to the fore. So that's the one critic. Similarly, for carbon taxing, which is again another major market-based solution, and currently this is a lot of talk is going on about carbon taxing, because one of the Nobel laureates of 2018 economics actually is a proponent of this carbon taxing. And the drawback again is that how much tax to put on a one unit of carbon emission. That was not very clear, because if you don't put enough taxes, that will not incentivize the farms to really decarbonize, right? So that calculation of the perfect tax, like what is the social cost of one ton of carbon or 1 unit of carbon emission, that has to be very precise. It cannot be too much, then that whole overall economic growth will suffer, and it cannot be too less, then it will not incentivize the carbon reduction. And this William Nordhaus, that if you read that comment at the bottom of the screen, William Nordhaus is one of the economists who got Nobel Prize in 2018. He is kind of created a model where this measure of what can be the social cost of 1 unit of carbon emission is measured. But if you read it carefully, the problem is that even his models are developing. So it's not kind of a very hard fact, and what are the factors to combine and model. That is not even very clear. So even I heard one of his interviews, he himself is telling that it's so complex, that how this overall carbon cycle occurs, and what is the social cost or calculation of the social cost of this emission is not a very simple task. And he himself is developing this model, and different costs are coming up. So if you read this last line, that according to his 2016 prediction, he puts that 2025 social cost carbon at 44 per ton, right? $44 per ton. But initially, when in 2007, he estimated it to around 16 or something, $16 per ton. Yes. So it's a kind of tripled. So if there's the model is not correct, and we are not deciding on the carbon tax properly, that system will collapse. So my point is that no one system is find foolproof or giving us that direction that we should go. So that even the government and the policymakers are really grappling with the situation, that what is the right solution. And in the world, what's happening is that where US is more market-based solution, cap and trade is very popular there, and carbon taxing is also coming up. Whereas European Union, and they also have regulation plus cap and trade is also there. And so mix of solutions are going on. So what is the future about this is it's just anybody's case, right? So this kind of institutional uncertainties are there. So my point is that the firms which are working inside a system, inside this economic policy system, is kind of still grappling with what is going to come, right? So they have to really kind of continuously adjust themselves with the institutional forces. But whatever happens, like on the institutional front, it is quite evident that the first burn has to be taken by the industries, right? Because if you see that overall share of the greenhouse gas emissions, almost 60% of total emissions comes from the industrial activities. So industry, including electricity and heat production, including transportation, right? So the common people like us will, of course, have some, responsibility, or we have to really, change our lifestyle or other usage of electricity, but that might be, but the industries will be that fast target point that and we know that from this pandemic itself, that when government actually feels that there is a urgent need, they can come very hard, right? Like that, how the lockdown happened. So they can come very hard on the industries and suddenly ban something or increase the carbon tax. This kind of future institutional changes can suddenly happen. So now how the managers of the firms are really placing themselves. So that's the topic of this session, that what is the strategist or the big firms are doing. So here's a project Gigaton. I don't know if anybody have heard of it. I also heard it very recently. That project Gigaton is basically Walmart's initiative. So Walmart is one of the biggest firms, I can say, in the Fortune 500 list. And what they're doing is that they're trying to reduce 1 billion ton of carbon. 1 billion ton is 1 gigaton. 1 billion ton of carbon dioxide emission from their value chain. And that is their target by 2030. So by 2030, in the next 10 years, they want to take initiatives across the their supply chain and their suppliers, their customers, and overall their whole network, to reduce their carbon emission by 1 gigaton. And you can see that there are different verticals that they're targeting. Energy, one is that going for less fossil fuels, agriculture, waste management, packaging, use recycling and this, etc. Deforestation, product use, so use more energy efficient products, etc. So this kind of very big ambitious plans are there from big firms, like not only Walmart. You take the in Unilever, or you take Amazon, and all the P&G. So all these firms, if you see and go to their website, you will see that everybody is committing to a zero carbon emission and then say full renewable by 2030, etc., etc. So a lot of big plans are there, right? At the same time, if we follow that, that banner in the bottom of the screen, that Walmart freezers leak gases that escalate climate change. So there are also many activists and organizations who are actually finding that hole in that whole, what you say, greenwashing kind of thing. So they are trying to find that, yeah, whatever you're doing is fine, but it's not enough. Like your own operations and your own, how the capitalistic world works, that it's basically not doing enough. So, for example, here that one of the activist group in the USA is pointing out to that Walmart is actually again leaking that gas in some other way, even if it is portraying that it is trying to do good for the society. So this is the discourse going on. So a lot of institutional forces are working on the farm, in industries. But like let's what I wanted to know is that it's not about that big farms, because it's a collective effort, and what is that overall an average farm is doing, right? And the small farm, middle, and of course the big farms are there, but what is that overall scenario? So I got two surveys, and very interestingly, so there's a McKinsey survey in 2007, around 2,000 farms. So what they found is that 60% of them regard climate change as strategically important, yet only 30% frequently act on the same. So what it means is that, first of all, 40% even doesn't consider climate change as strategically important. So that's again scary. But even if 60% acknowledge, they are aware, they know that what is coming, only half of that actually act on the same. So there's a big difference between that awareness and the behavior, right? And even, you know, if you think in introspect within ourselves, that we know about so much about climate change, we read in the, you know, popular newspapers or, you know, in the feeds, but how much we do and contribute. I mean, even if, you know, it's not going to make a very big difference, but of course this collective effort can make a difference, right? So, you know, day-to-day life, we're not doing consciously doing something about it, right? I mean, I just think that how many of us have rooftop solar in our houses? I mean, even policies are not even trying to push it, but there are, of course, channels that one can, you know, check. And then there is this bar diagram. You see that there is a categorization from A to D minus, and this is also again a survey by Carbon Disclosure Project. So from A means that they're very active on climate actions. That's they gave climate scores. A is the highest and D minus is the lowest. But as you can see, again, it's kind of normal on the A minus category, right? So again, it you know, identifies the problem that not many firms or many managers are really taking great action to this grand challenge, and that's basically a source of concern for us. So let me come back to our own country, the India. So here also, if you see that big corporates, like the business groups, like here I put the Mahindra Group on the top and the Godrej on the bottom. So they are also, you know, portraying that they're trying their bit to address this issue. And as you can see, they are doing more energy efficient technologies and adopting some renewable technology, and always trying to, you know, build a greener India, and those kind of discourses are there. So we go to any top business group website, and the group level activities will show that they're all in, or they're very committed to, you know, address this climate change issue. But again, my question is, it is whether it is enough, whether even for a big firm, whether it is enough, and as a collective, you know, whether all the different firms and all the different groups are acting on the same direction or not. So that was the in my mind also, as when I tried to, you know, do this research. And in India, let me take a step back and just portray that how this institutional environment in India is, you know, now moving. So on the top, you see that there is a timeline I put. The different institutional offices, basically authorities, basically evolved in our country. So in 1982, you can see that DNE is the Department of Non-Conventional Energy Sources. So that was a department at that time in the early 1980s. And then 1987, there's IREDA, it's basically a financing organization for the renewable energy projects, right? So they provide loans, and so that the farms, you know, can adopt renewable energy. So that came up in 1987. Then in 1992 is a very important year, because the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, UNFCCC, was established in this year, 1992, where basically, which is actually, you know, governing on those international climate summits, right? Like the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, etc. That all comes under UNFCCC. And in that year, what Indian government did is that they converted the department into a full ministry. So it was called MNES at that time, Ministry of New Non-Conventional Energy Sources. Then in 2001, Energy Conservation Act came, right, in India. So what the more important thing of Energy Conservation Act is that it provided the government authorities some, I'd say that some power to do energy audits in selected industries, right? So for example, the high emitters, or the high energy intensive industries like steel or cement or aluminum, all the heavy metal industries. So there's a list of industries where the government officials will do energy audit. So that's a big power from the authorities, like this act came up, right? And then in 2002, India ratified Kyoto Protocol. So Kyoto Protocol was the Kyoto Convention was in 1997, where that more than 190 countries came up together, and they all pledged to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and India is also part of that. In 2002, it actually ratified that protocol. And in 2006, what happens is that this ministry, MNES, is renamed or rebranded as MNRE, which means Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, right? So after that, in 2008, there is a National Action Plan on Climate Change that was under that UPA government, it came up, and then now it is progressing, and it has come up with a National Energy Policy, NEP, and it was in a draft stage a few years back. I don't know whether it is acted or not. I feel it's still in draft stage, National Energy Policy, and it is actually talking about how India as a country will actually tackle this issue, and how our energy energy usage and what do I say, that environment, our energy environment will grow from here, right? And in 2016, India ratified the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement again is another more stringent measure of this about all these countries came up with, that we have to keep this global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade before the pre-industrial level. So whatever the global temperature was at the pre-industrial level, it's 150 200 years back, that increase cannot be more than 2%. If it happens more than 2 degrees centigrade, sorry, if it happens more than 2 degrees centigrade before the pre-industrial level, this disastrous consequences will trigger, right? So that can be that cannot be rolled back. So once this, the important point about climate change is that once this trigger happens, it will be kind of one-way path. You cannot really stop that then, right? So that's why the mitigation strategies are so much important. So this is the overall progress. So what we can see, that India is actually gradually progressing towards using less carbon in the economy. But there is a catch again. If you see that graph at the bottom, two graphs on the left side, so total carbon emission trend. So here you can see that the top three countries are China, United States, and India, right? China at the top, it's basically very high growth, and United States at the second, it's basically flattish, a little less than in the 2000 level, and then India is in the green, right? So it's increasing. So these are top three countries, the total carbon emission. But on the right side, you see that per capita carbon emission trend, right? So per head, how much carbon is we are emitting. Here you can see that India is at the bottom, right? I mean, bottom means comparing these four states. China is still in the, United States, USA in the top, then Germany, and then China is basically progressing towards Germany level, right? So China is still increasing the per capita trend, whereas India is not very high level when you talk about per capita. So what Indian government stand is that we need fossil fuels or the economic engine to run for our growth, right? And given that per capita emission is so low, there should be a the measure of that the cost of switching from fossil fuel based economy to renewable based economy should be mostly taken by the developed nations like United States, right? Because they have actually used this whole fossil fuel industrialization, waste industrialization, and that was the main reason why we're standing in that current situation. So why not they should actually pay for this or invest in these technologies, rather than a poor country or a growing country like India should be equally responsible. So the term is called common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR. So the term was coined in the Kyoto Protocol, which means that we all have responsibilities towards climate change, but it should be differentiated across developed and developing nations. And it's in developing nations still fighting for that the right that it should not be equally cutting down carbon emission, because they need growth, they need economic growth, and this what do I say, that conflict is still going on. And because of this also, you see that United States have sometimes taken a different stand, that it is not ratifying the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Agreement, because it doesn't again belong to this club that okay, the poor countries will be given a leeway, right? So this kind of international negotiations are still going on. So the point is again that that the institutional uncertainties are still there. So nobody can second guess now what will be the India's or the different emerging economies policy standpoint in the next 10 years or 20 years. So that's only the evolving situation, right? Okay. Now, again, I'll show a little bit of my own data, like given this overall institutional environment, how the managers of the firms are thinking. And here I'm not talking about big firms, but I actually did wanted to survey, in different sectors like the energy sector or the pharmaceutical sector, and want to know from the management themselves that what is their perception. So one thing is that, yeah, I studied all these institutional data and understood from the level discourses, but what the managers are really thinking on ground, that was again my goal. So here I have listed down a lot of, so I took interviews from many managers. So I have listed down a few key comments, and these are very quote unquote from their interview excerpts. And if you go through them, or I will just try to explain one by one. So from the motivation perspective, what I can see that it's still not doing social good, right? I mean, they are not still motivated enough that we should do something for climate change, or even if it's not benefits us, we should adopt renewable energy or energy efficient technology. So the mindset is still that if I adopt renewable energy or if I go energy efficient, whether I get that return on investment. So the ROI calculation is still pertinent in their mind. So I mean, it's in a large scale. If you look at the different industries and firms, the climate change issue is still discussed as an opportunity to reduce cost, which many critics say that it should not be like that. It's really a threat. It's not an opportunity. So the motivation is again still not enough to take a proactive action. Then from policy standpoint, what I got the feedback from this again managers is that especially in India, the policy is also not very stable. So for example, when there's a talk of RPO is renewable purchase obligation. So which means that the electricity generating farms can produce energy from renewable sources also, and the distributed companies has some obligation to purchase certain percentage of their electricity from renewable sources, right? But what the ground experience is that these discounts are so powerful, and sometimes they are not maintaining their commitment. So they are not even aligning themselves to the policies of the state or other nation, that this much percentage you have to buy from the renewable sources. So even if the law is there, it is not happening on the ground. And of course, it might be there's some negotiation or political what do I say that collusion, etc., where these powerful discount distribute companies are basically taking advantage of, right? And also there is another talk about that the pre-purchase agreements, right? So the PPAs. So that is also whenever the government is giving some contract or some tender to produce renewable sources, those pre-purchase agreements right now happen on reverse auction basis, right? So whoever can produce renewable sources at cheapest rate actually will get that contract. But again, what we have seen from the newspapers and the different reports is that even if the contract is sealed, sometimes the government is actually taking a step back and canceling this contract. So government is probably not ready to really commit to these contracts in many cases, right? So it happens in Andhra Pradesh, it happens in Uttar Pradesh also. So these kind of uncertainties are there. So the investors who are trying to invest in renewable energy, they are seeing the cost not as what is that, in media we see that solar cost is the cheapest now, less than 2.5 per unit. So they are seeing the cost is not only that reverse auction cost, rather that uncertainty cost is also there. So if there is any change in technology or this policy, the contracts are not maintained, then what is the cost in the long run? So the investment cost includes all of these, right? And then you see that, no, I heard from those managers themselves that it's not, the cost is not including all those uncertainty costs. So in that sense that, the renewable energy and is still not cost effective enough in our country. And then of course technology. So in a country like India, there's not enough technological support, right? So we still depend on China on some, the basic material of this solar power, that silica and that, solar cells, right? And we actually, our policy talks about, energy security if you go to renewable energy. So we don't have to depend on fossil fuels. But what happens if we have to depend on technology of, solar or wind, right? So it still again brings back to that same board, right? That we're dependent on outside. So how energy security is maintained. And that one of the important comments you see that, technology in a long-term management right now. So what managers are thinking that right now the solar or the wind, so wind technology kind of matured, but solar technology is still evolving. It's not even matured. And we need battery technology to, be viable, large-scale generation of solar energy, right? So the battery technology is also still evolving. It's not mature enough that you can store the solar energy in the daytime and use in the night. So what managers are telling that if we just invest now, we'll lock in the technology for a long term, and then if the technology matures and very, very best technology comes, then we will not be able to switch quickly. So what we are trying to do is that we just need to wait a little bit, and once the technology evolves or the best technology comes, then we'll adopt. So that's a wait and watch game that managers are doing, right? So that there's a point, right? That in a country like India, like why do we invest right now in a technology is not cost effective? And lastly, the discourse in an Indian scenario, given that even the national energy policy talks about this, that India as a country right now cannot afford to suddenly move to renewable energy altogether. So there is still scope for fossil fuels, and given that so much electricity still have not reached villages and poor section of the country, that right now we have to make a balance. So there will be a balancing act between this renewable energy and the fossil fuels, and probably a large share will go to the renewable energy sources from now on, but fossil fuels cannot be completely replaced in a country like India. Whereas in Germany, you can see that they have taken a complete overall of the fossil fuel and moving towards full renewable, right? But India as a country cannot afford that. So this kind of thinking, the point is that this kind of thinking is in the manager's mind, what I got from my interviews. And if such kind of thinking is there, that even India as a country is fighting to have some fossil fuels, what the signal the managers get is that, well, right now we just sit and watch if what the government is doing, because this is a much bigger problem. Government is doing its bit, and we'll just comply with the regulations. That's all. I mean, no proactive or ahead of regulatory kind of thinking is there, right? So that's one aspect. And because of that, the two choices that the industries have is to reduce carbon emission. One is renewable energy adoption, and another is energy efficiency. So energy efficiency means that use fossil fuels, use the coal and the oil and the gas, but use more energy efficient technologies. And there are a lot of technology in the market is growing, it's coming up. And what it does is that it's basically more incremental approach. So you don't have to completely overhaul your energy sources or energy system. You just incrementally keep on, if you make a more efficient investments in energy usage, right? So it's a cost reduction approach. So managers are happy that, yeah, you are saving on the cost. And also they can report that, yeah, we are becoming energy efficient. Whereas the scientists say that just energy efficiency is not good enough. Why? Because as I told before, that we actually in a stage where we need to reduce the total carbon emission. We cannot even incrementally add any more carbon emission. And if it happens that climate change is kind of will come in a foreseeable future, right? So scientists are very convinced that energy efficiency will do alone, right? So energy efficiency is a good start, but we need to really focus on renewable energy that is completely overhauls that fossil fuel based system to a solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources. Because renewable energy sources is the one which has minimal GHG emission, and it actually decarbonizes the overall economic system. But as I said, the risks are like they're high upfront investments. There's a long payback period. The technological challenges are there. Policy uncertainty is there, and these risks are in a heightened manner in a country like India. So given these high risks, the managers are really not incentivized enough or motivated enough to go for renewable energy. So they are mostly resorting to energy efficiency. If you see any firms annual report or and any commentary or even go to the websites, you'll see that okay, renewable energy, the targets, I mean, they're talking about it, but there's parallelly also much focus on energy efficiency, because that gives them that in a balancing act that they're aware of this problem, they are doing their bit, but they're doing in a more risk averse manner, right? And when I actually again coded my managerial statement, so this is my coding that I looked at their speeches, CEO speeches from 52 companies, and I tried to categorize them like how they are thinking about RE adoption approach. I found that there are 5 major approaches. So one is aggressive, that some firms, some managers are very positive that the renewable energy is the future, we are doing it. I mean, these are not behavior, but these are just their intent. At least at the intent level, they're very aggressive. But then there are balanced way that they kind of recognize that renewable energy is the future, but we cannot do away with fossil fuels. So we are trying to balance in both, which is again stand of the country also. The third is a cautious. Cautious means they are actually skeptical about renewable energy adoption. So they don't fully recognize also that the renewable energy is a call for the time right now. So they are really questioning that technological viability of it, or the cost of it, etc. The fourth is very interesting, is diplomatic. So they are acknowledging the need for sustainability, that we need to be sustainable, we need to be tackling climate change and other environmental problems, but they're not actually disclosing that their RE adoption intent, what they're doing about it. So they are saying that, we understand the problem, but what is their action? That is not very clear from their speeches. And the fifth category is very I mean, they are completely against that, not against, I'd say that they are completely ignoring this renewable energy move. So they are completely onto the alternate approach only, that we are going for cleaner conventional sources. Conventional sources means it's fossil fuels. So they are nearly focusing on that, we cannot go to renewables at given this, maybe their industry type, maybe it's a very heavy industry, heavy energy use industry, and they are just focusing on reducing their carbon emission by energy efficiency. That is what my point was, that this is a very easy approach that you're tackling climate change. So overall, if you see that not many firms are aggressive, rather balanced, or the diplomatic approach is more, and that is really a source of concern again, because climate change requires, I mean, if you look at that IPCC reports, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it requires a very aggressive approach towards reducing carbon emission, but that is not happening at the firm level. Again, this is from my sample. This is a large sample which I did in my thesis, and I tried to calculate the adoption percentage across industry sectors. So agricultural, mining, manufacturing, and financial and other services. And these are Indian firms. So you can see that on the y-axis is basically the percentage of firms that are adopting within that industry, within that sector actually, not industry sector. So if you see the agricultural sector has around 20% firms adopting renewable energy. Mining and manufacturing is kind of in the middle, a little over 12% of the firms. Financial services is also there, other services on the bottom. So why this agricultural sector coming to the top is because of the categorization of the renewable energy. So right now, renewable energy is under the categories of solar, wind, hydro, small hydro, and biomass. So this biomass is very readily available to the agricultural sector, because let's say sugar industry or the paper industry, they got this waste, and the bio waste that they can use as a biomass to produce some renewable energy, right? Biogas, etc. So they are kind of at that starting of this evolution, whereas solar, wind is a little high tech, and that is not still adopted in a high volume in India right now. So if you see that manufacturing industry, which actually is kind of using the electricity or energy intensive, is kind of in the middle. So not many farms. It's a little over 12%. So it's not much, right? As far as adoption is concerned. And this is a data about this regional adoption rate. So on the left side is basically that per capita NSDP, net state domestic product. So that shows that the regional development in some sense, that with the per capita as a proxy. On the right hand side is basically the percentage of farms adopting renewable energy. So in each state, what is the percentage of farms that adopted renewable energy? And this again, adoption means again any category like solar, wind, whatever category it can adopt. And what I can interpret from this, that say little developed states are adopting a little more, like in the south, say Tamil Nadu, or in the west Gujarat, Andhra in the south. So they are adopting more. Whereas on the eastern region of India, which is less developed and they are not developed much as the western side, is actually adopting less. So that's the correlation, and it can happen through different regions, because on the fossil fuels like coal, etc., are again most available in the eastern region. So that might be a historical reason why the fossil fuel usage is more there. But this is a kind of gives us some perspective that there's a regional variation, there's a local variation of adoption across the country. And one might ask that what about RE availability? That probably that renewable energy availability makes a difference. Yes, of course it makes a difference. So say a state like Rajasthan, which has a lot of solar luminance is there. State of Gujarat or Tamil Nadu has a lot of wind power. So they might be blessed with some renewable sources, which is natural, of course. And they are because of the availability, the adoption is higher. And you can see from this table that the high renewable energy availability has higher percentage of adoption, right? But one interesting point to note is that if you look at the low development and low growth, these two columns, versus high development and high growth, these two columns, that when the development of the growth is low, this availability does not make much difference. So if you look at this difference in high and low availability in the low development and low growth states, you will not see much difference. Whereas when the development level is high or the growth is high, this availability makes a difference. Which means that when institutional developments are taking a pace, this requires a lot of financial support, right? So the institutional development, the economic development brings in these resources, the skills and the investments, and maybe that regulatory authorities and other different institutional forces are higher in the high development region. And when this higher institutional forces are higher, then the farms are forced to adopt more. And when this availability is also there, so the farms will adopt more. So this is what I interpret from this. And then finally, what I also looked at, how governance and the ownership actually makes any difference, if at all. And yeah, I found that from my study and the sample is that, yes, governance also makes a difference. So for example, I looked at the family ownership. So family ownership means that when certain family or the individuals has high concentration of ownership, maybe more than 50% of ownership in the farm. So what the theories about family farm talks about, that family ownership basically incentivizes long-term goals, right, for the farms. So because family has a succession and it requires the farm to have better longevity for the next generation, etc., etc. So and less agency cost also. So this family governance basically incentivizes long-term actions, and renewable energy adoption is a long-term action, right? So it's not benefiting right now, but if you invest, if you learn now, if you just make your first step, probably in the long run, how that climate change is evolving, suddenly you might take the benefit of it. So if you see that from 2006 to 2014, the year-wise trend is basically increasing, be it family or non-family, it's basically increasing, it's increasing trend. But when the family ownership is high, basically the adoption rate is also high. And the right side table is basically only for the manufacturing sector. I did this, and again the same trend, that it's increasing from 2006 to 2014. The trend is increasing, and also family ownership is high, then the adoption rate is also high. So these are kind of anecdotal, these are kind of like correlational data, but in my thesis actually I did more rigorous modeling and find this relationship in a more rigorous way. So these are all empirical evidences that I wanted to display, but what are the theoretical understandings behind this? So what are the theoretical viewpoints, the why farms are behaving the way they are behaving? And I found that there are four major viewpoints that I came across. This is not exhaustive set. There are different viewpoints, of course, but these four viewpoints are what any researcher can think about, that why the farms are responding differently and not responding enough towards the climate change issue, right? So one is the tragedy of the commons. So it's basically a term by Harding, 1968. He coined this term, tragedy of the commons. And what it means is that whenever there is any public goods, right? Like for example, environment, the air and the water, these are public goods. Like these are private properties, right? As such, and when there are negative externalities to such public goods, then the self-interested individual or the farm acts in a way that doesn't cater to the optimal usage of these public goods or optimal benefit of that whole society. Why is that? Is basically simple, the game theoretic solution, right? That uh, uh, if one does take some care of these public goods, the benefit is shared, right? But the cost is only to that entity which actually is taking that action. So nobody then wants to take that action, right? Because why should I, as a self-interested individual or firm, why should I take that cost or the investment, whereas the benefit will be for everyone? So these are the tragedy of the commons, that this kind of goods doesn't get that efficient or that utmost care from that self-interested entities. And it's basically that kind of without a coordinating mechanism. So if there's no coordinator, there's all independent entities, then without a coordinating mechanism, there cannot be an optimal solution. The solution will always be suboptimal. So there will be always deterioration of these public goods. And if you think carefully that in case of climate change, there's no command and control authority, right? So because it's a global problem, so all the international community should come together, but the sovereign is still at the state level, right? That in the national level. So even if there is United Nations, it doesn't have very legal or binding kind of authority on the states, on the nations. There's always there's this my point is that there is always an absence of this independent commanding authority. Because of that, this global environment is actually not taken care of in that sense. And then the second viewpoint is spatio-temporal scale by Bansal 2018. So what she's arguing that the environmental problems come in different space and different time scale, right? So if you talk about that pollution control or waste management, those are more measurable, those are more tangible problems, right? So if you say farm that you have to reduce the pollution at that level, or if you cannot waste, you cannot, you have to reduce your waste management system, or sorry, you have to reduce your waste and improve your waste management system. They can readily take that action because they know what is asked for, and they can really measure it, what was before, what is after. They can produce reports and be happy, and the authorities are also happy with it. But what happened with climate change kind of situation, the environmental issue is so large, so big, and the scale is the global scale is so huge that why once a firm takes an adoption of renewable energy or some action to reduce this carbon emission, it doesn't get that immediate report or immediate impact what is happening to the overall climate change, right? So the impact is not really visible. It's not even temporally visible, because the climate change is actually a decadal problem. So the whatever action you take now will actually manifest in 2-3 decades after that. And even it cannot be attributed to only your own action. It's a collective action. So because of this spatio-temporal scale change, that is a huge spatio-temporal issue, the attention to that issue is not gaining momentum. So the theory talks about that the attention to the issues gain momentum when the space and the time horizon is basically more manageable towards that organization's activities. So it can be a few years, or whatever location you are working on, it is related to that location, then organization will attend to those issues. But climate change is kind of has crossed all the spatio-temporal limitations, right? It's a very big in space and time. And third is very interesting is that this framing, localizing, and normalizing framework. So Wright and Neighbor, what they are talking about is that uh, uh, how the managers view climate change is kind of, as I told before, is kind of opportunity rather than threat. So whenever you see any discourse about that, how managers talk about this climate change, they're talking about that this is an opportunity that we can leverage upon. So opportunity to reduce carbon emission by energy efficient technologies. And that is the framing, right? So we should cater to climate change. How do you do that? We reduce carbon emission, that will reduce our cost, and we just bring in energy efficient technologies. But what they're missing is that this is not enough, and we cannot blame them for that, right? Because there is no collective impact that is day-to-day basis they can see. So they just take an incremental approach. That framing is basically helping them in that sense. And then localizing means, as I talked about, that they are trying to see that how they can contribute to this climate change issues just by what they are doing. So if they are producing a product, they just want to make this product more greener. They'll not completely discard that product, or completely overhaul that overall economic or the business model. They just try to increasing or incrementally change that behavior of the farm, and it's called localizing. That you just incrementally do some effort and then just report that we are doing our bit. And finally, normalizing. So this is very interesting that at the end of the day, what the managers are doing, as per the authors, is that they're again trying to show this climate change as an issue which they are catering to or they're addressing, and which again, in turn, giving higher shareholder value. So it's coming back to square one, that the shareholder value increment in or maximization, that kind of thought process is again coming to that business as usual. So the main point is that the critics are saying that this shareholder value maximization, this kind of thought process is the crux of the problem. That kind of efficient push through efficiencies and just create wealth for the shareholders is not going to work if we have to address the climate change. What we need is basically more diverse stakeholder approach. The stakeholder, like the communities, the local communities, the other natural world itself is a stakeholder, right? So if the focus is not diverse, just only on the shareholder value maximization, then you are basically doing the same thing again and again, and it will actually aggravate the problem. So that is that whole understanding. And finally, the institutional complexity, which is by Greenwood, which I actually used in my thesis, is that it talks about that there are different institutional forces, right? And they're conflicting. We discussed, right? They are conflicting ways of reducing renewable energy, carbon emission. They're conflicting even institutions with the market logic of growth versus community logic of sustainability. And in a country like India, the policy is not very clear which way to go. So given this conflicting logics, it creates an institutional complexity. And when there is institutional complexity, the organization's own filters, like the governance or the ownership, actually determines how the organization behaves. So it prioritizes which institution to look at, or which institutional logic to follow, depending upon how the organization is designed. So that's the institutional complexity theory, and this is kind of explains that how the different organizations are behaving differently. I'm almost towards the end of my slide. So given this whole scenario and context, and we can understand that how complex the situation is. So as a researcher, what I find the challenges for this kind of research, that in climate change and how farms respond, is one is of course data. So the farm level large scale data is really a challenge, because when the international level data is there, is basically at the national level. So you can have good data about how different countries are adopting renewable energy or using fossil fuels. But I faced a challenge that when you try to get the farm level data, it's not collected in a same way. So for me, it was a manual coding. So you have to go to the annual report and whatever disclosure they have done, you have to code that. So that large scale farm level data is a challenge. But of course, it will come up, and as the regulations come up, then probably more available data will be there. And next is complexity. So the complexity of the situation is to understand that there are a lot of interrelated factors. So what is a climate action, and what is benefiting the climate issue, or what is not, how the managers are thinking. So this is a lot of interrelated factors. Even if you want to model something in supply chain or something, so what are the factors that should come into that model. These complexities are always there, and it's an evolving issue, right? So every day some new things are coming up, and the opportunities are also there. So again, data is again another opportunity, because since it's an evolving issue, so the data is not completely exhausted or used up, right? So if you find any particular case that a farm specific response, that if you can go inside a farm and how they're thinking about climate change and how they're behaving, that can be a good process study. So what I think is that a very good process case-based study or comparative case-based study can be a good opportunity at this point, until some large-scale data comes up. And of course, the contribution part, that is a novel issue, because this kind of environmental challenge is unprecedented, has never happened before. And it's an important issue, of course. So once you research this out, there are big audience to hear you, right? So these are the opportunities right now. So I will just rest my case here for today. So I'll be happy to take questions. I hope I didn't get. Oh, I took almost an hour.
Thank you, Santanu. And we'll now open the floor for questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise them. Maybe one question I can start off with, like how do you like for management scholars and for like many of the aspiring management scholars like us, how do you see this field evolving in terms of the kind of opportunities we have for doing research? Like, for example, what I notice more and more in literature is a focus more from shareholders to stakeholders, like in terms of the moving away from financial performance to corporate social performance. So how do you see that happening in the climate change scenario?
Yeah, right. Right. You are very right about it, that the movement is towards defining performance. I mean, from strategic management point of view, I can really say that what is happening is that so far we have measured performance only by what is the profit, right? And because that's a shareholder value. But more and more that literature coming up, that we need a holistic approach towards performance, and it is not just for the literature, it's basically happening in the real world also. So the investing community is basically trying to focus on the sustainable performance and identify firms which are investing in sustainability. So there's a ESG index, you've heard of it, right? That environmental, social and the governance index. So more and more ESG index are popularized, and it started in the West also. In India also, I think some ESG index is there, and then more awareness of the investors are increasing. They will probably try to find that performance through the ESG index. So it's kind of a culmination of the economic performance, social performance, and environmental performance. So when that happens, and of course the literature will actually have to contribute that how that overall performance can be calculated. It cannot be like just because it's less apples and oranges, right? You cannot add them up. So this some kind of research can happen, that what is the overall performance, how can be measured through the triple bottom line. So the triple bottom line is these three pillars. And more that happens, and more that ESG indices or the ESG performance picks up, and then probably I assume that a plethora of investments towards that kind of firms which is high on the ESG index and that performance. And the researchers, what they can do is that if they can be ahead of the game just by modeling their performance, and then show that what kind of firms and why they are high on ESG indexes and etc. And probably if there's a correlation of ESG performance versus the economic performance, that kind of research can come up. And another point I talked about, that there are data challenges, but one opportunity can be that the process by which this climate actions are being taken inside the farm. So if anybody wants to qualitatively understand how the decision makers, how the supply chains are changed within a particular case, that can be a live in a live way that can be studied, because it's just happening in front of our eyes, right? It's not something happened. So that's a very good challenge, not challenge, I should good opportunity, that in a natural experiment you can really see over the 2-3 years how the farms are evolving and doing the environmental sustainability part. So I have addresses some of your doubts, right?
Chandra, you can stop sharing the screen so that everyone can see you.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, another question I had, I want to ask you about, like, how do you see this because of this corona pandemic? Do you see there being a change in the climate change discourse? Like, I've seen two views which have emerged. One is the view that because now there has been less use in fossil fuels, so it becomes more cheaper. So there is an incentive for firms to now start using fossil fuels on a larger scale, which may take it to the adverse effect. Or then there is other view which is saying that because now governments had a chance to take pause, they may be able to install more environmental friendly practices and um, kind of pull back some of the damage which has already been done. So how do you
Right.
see this evolving, like, over the next few years?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I also read many reports that because of this pandemic and for so many months the economic activity is suddenly stopped, whether it's basically making a kind of transition point that we can really take that leap, that suddenly there's a break in that whole economic activity, right? So there's an opportunity for the governments to really invest in renewable energy and go ahead and more fast-paced towards this transition. On the other hand, as you pointed out, that because of this oil price crashed, probably again more disincentivizes that renewable energy investment. So why not use that cheaper oil and have that and back on economic growth track, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean there is still different lobbies are on both sides. But I personally believe that given that the national communities and the international leaders kind of almost together, except a few, maybe US is one of the biggest, why do I say that, drawback here, because it's a powerful country, but it's not completely in that agreement, the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol. But as most of the 99% of the countries are together, I believe that they will not go back to this fossil fuels because of this pandemic. Rather, they'll take this as an opportunity to invest on the renewable sources. And I believe this pandemic is kind of pushing towards that direction. I mean, that break is blessing in disguise, I'd say. And one might think that because of this economic activities lockdown for 3 to 6 months, whether we benefited anything about the fossil fuel emission. I mean, one might think, yeah, we got much more time because we didn't produce this much fossil fuels across the globe, but this is not true. When I just read a report from my McKinsey that whatever we have already done, we have to really put the effort in the same way, that we cannot really relax that, okay, 6 months we have not done anything and fossil fuels are not emitted, but whatever damage we have already done through this 100 years of industrialization, we cannot really stop, and we really need to decarbonize. My point was that it's not that we make less carbon, we really need to decarbonize and completely replace the fossil fuels by renewable energy. Not maybe in a few years, but in a few decades, of course, it has to be done. So that is my view on this.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I think we can, on this positive note, I think we can close the session. Thank you, Santanu, for taking time out to talk on a really relevant and interesting topic, which I'm sure like many of us maybe in the future would be taking up as our research area. Thank you. So
yeah, thank you, Vipin, and happy to be here, and thank you.
So the recording will be available in YouTube in some time. So thank you everyone for allowing us to host us. Thank you from Radio Sophia. So we'll be signing out now. Thank you.
Thank you.